The man in front of me is a top-tier assassin who specializes in disguising himself as someone weak before he kills. But lately, Pete's been having problems. So Pete joined a support group for workaholics, hoping to get his life back on track, but this one decision would cost him everything. This one choice sealed his fate. Meanwhile, William, the boss of the assassin syndicate, got a call that someone found a listening device hidden in his office. The last person who'd been in that office was Pete, and William's face went dark the second he heard it. The organization suspected Pete was the mole, but he had no idea. Before he could figure out what was happening, the boss's men grabbed him. Pete recognized the leader immediately. It was Laika. Pete thought Laika was joking around and even cracked a few jokes back. But then the conversation suddenly shifted from football to something darker, an interrogation. When he saw the blowtorch shooting flames, Pete realized these guys weren't messing around. As a top assassin, he didn't hesitate and struck first. Taking down 10 guys at once was easy for him, and in just 2 minutes he'd cleared the room. Laika demanded to know who Pete had met with and whether he was planning to betray William, but Pete was completely in the dark. He insisted he'd only joined a support group. He explained he was just trying to balance work and life with professional help, and he hadn't leaked any secrets or betrayed anyone. But Laika wouldn't listen and still believed Pete was the traitor. Laika passed out from blood loss first, and even though he was still confused, Pete grabbed Laika's phone and called an ambulance before leaving. Pete walked into a bar, but when the owner Maura saw him, her face immediately soured. They had history, and she wasn't happy to see him. Maura hated staying tangled up with an ex, so she told him to leave. Pete put on a pitiful act and said he'd been going through hell lately and needed a drink to numb the pain. Reluctantly, Maura poured him one, and when she heard her ex's own father thought he was the informant, she almost felt bad for him. Suddenly, the men at the table behind him stood up and closed in on Pete with murder in their eyes. These guys were clearly more assassins sent by William, but they didn't attack right away. But the guy never showed up. Now the fat man felt disrespected and reached for his weapon. Maura fired 6 rounds, and the low-level thug fighting Pete dropped instantly. With perfect teamwork, they took down the assassins fast, but the fat man stood up with a smug grin, confident Maura was out of bullets. What happened next shocked him. Pete asked his ex to help him contact William so he could find out what the hell was going on. But this time, Maura refused to get involved and told Pete to handle his own mess. When she showed zero loyalty to the past, Pete decided to call a friend. But the moment he stepped outside, another crew of killers shoved him into a car. The guy with glasses was named Minji. Pete swore again he wasn't a traitor, then casually asked how much William was paying them to hunt him down. When he heard it was only $500,000, Pete felt insulted that his life was worth so little. He asked Minji to call the boss so he could explain everything, but Minji saw through the trick immediately. A risky plan formed in his mind, and the second Minji in the passenger seat let his guard down, Pete struck. His hands moved fast, hitting multiple targets. Pete trapped Minji with the seatbelt, and the driver couldn't turn around to fight while he was behind the wheel. If Pete could take out the 2 low-level guys in the back, he'd escape the ambush. After 2 stun guns fired, all 4 men slumped unconscious. Once the danger passed, Pete called his best friend Chris. He didn't understand why attending a support group made everyone think he was a traitor. Even his closest friend Chris believed it, so Pete grabbed the gun and demanded Chris hear him out. But Chris wouldn't listen and asked why Pete would risk everything to come find him. Was the FBI using support groups as cover now? No matter what, Chris was convinced Pete was the mole. The argument turned into a fight. During the struggle, Chris's phone fell, and just as they were going at it, a call came through that made them both freeze. It was Chris's wife calling, and the 2 of them stopped fighting the second they heard the ringtone. Chris clearly didn't care about his friend at all, but after the fight, he thought it over and realized if Pete really wasn't a traitor, the only way forward was to find proof and make peace with the boss. Otherwise, the hit squads would never stop coming. The best shot was still getting Maura's help, so after leaving the docks, Pete went straight back to find her. His ex told him Chris had just been by, and she said it straight. Everyone else has a life. Only Pete stayed buried in the work, ignoring everyone who cared about him. Pete stood up to argue. She felt like Pete was just using her. Before she could finish, a squad of killers kicked the door in. William had obviously sent them. The leader, a guy with wild hair, looked way too confident. He ordered his men to cuff Pete, but before they could move, Maura jabbed him with a tranquilizer dart. The hairy guy dropped, confused. Only 4 goons left now, and Pete and Maura had no trouble handling them. When one goon pinned Pete down, Maura didn't hesitate. She stepped in and helped. He told Maura exactly how he felt, no filter. After hearing that, Pete said he wanted to turn this around. His first move was to call the boss William directly. Right then, on William's end, William's phone rang. It was Pete calling from Moira's phone. The second he heard the traitor's voice, William thought Pete had kidnapped his daughter. Pete immediately told the boss that wasn't true. He swore he'd never betray anyone in the organization, and he'd never hurt William or his daughter, years ago. When William found out Pete was dating his daughter, he'd already started treating him like family. Now William was furious because he felt betrayed, but Pete pushed back, saying he'd handled every dirty job for William. He'd solved every messy problem, and now William sent people to kill him. William told Pete to remember his place, and said the only way to stop the hit was to prove he wasn't a traitor. But the deadline was sunrise. If Pete didn't prove it by then, the price on his head would go up until he was dead. Pete didn't know what to do. Then Moira had an idea: take out Angie, and that would prove his loyalty. Angie was William's rival for years. If Pete actually killed him, William would see Pete's value again. They didn't have a choice, so they geared up and got moving. Moira opened up her weapons stash. They drove to the building where Angie was. With Moira covering him from a sniper position, Pete slipped into the compound and quietly took down the guard at the gate. To avoid raising the alarm, Pete switched to a wooden baton once he was inside. He heard voices laughing nearby, so he crept closer. A few guards were slacking off. Pete didn't say a word, just grabbed the bat and charged in. They went down so fast, Pete barely broke a sweat. The fight was over before it started. Right after he dropped the guards, a heavy hitter rushed him. The moment their eyes met, time froze. Then a gunshot cracked through the air, and they started trading fire in the tight warehouse. The guy got blown apart in seconds, but the problem was more enemies kept showing up. Pete couldn't handle them all. At the last second, he sprinted to a hole in the floor and dropped into the warehouse below. Pete was the best killer in the organization. A few low-level guys surrounding him didn't faze him at all. While they searched for him, he hid behind cover and waited for them to walk into his trap. He didn't know yet that Moira had been captured. Right then, they were dragging her in for interrogation. The woman in the red dress knew her. Their target tonight was Angie. Moira's brother used to do business with Angie, but her brother died in an accident. That was part of why William and Angie hated each other. Then Moira claimed she didn't know Pete. Right in the middle of the standoff, a huge explosion went off outside. The leader with the bun ran out to check. Angie knew something was wrong and grabbed a weapon too. Now their cover was completely blown. At the same time, the girl with the bun spotted them. The second she saw movement, she fired. Pete dodged, but the bullet grazed him. As she closed in, he threw his weapon to distract her and bought himself a second. He didn't give her a chance to recover. Cornered, Pete threw his last flashbang. It almost ruptured her eardrums. While she staggered from the pain, Pete rushed her without hesitating. If he didn't finish this before sunrise, he'd miss the deadline. He pulled a plastic bag from his back. He threw it over her head and yanked it tight. The girl with the bun shook and collapsed to the ground. Pete got on top of her and wrapped both hands around her throat until she finally stopped moving. Meanwhile, Moira had already kicked the gun out of Angie's hand. The boss's daughter was seriously good. After the first exchange, the guy didn't stand a chance, but then Angie started to find his rhythm. If she stayed pinned like this much longer, she'd pass out from lack of air. Luckily, Pete heard the noise and came running. It didn't take long before the enemy had him completely locked down, and Moira was still fighting hard. Then, at the last possible second, she grabs a necklace off the floor and drives the sharp pendant straight into his arm. She is done waiting and decides to kill him herself, but Pete's in danger too. He finally gets his chance and locks the guy down from behind. Now both Pete and Moira are trapped. Then, out of nowhere, she yanks the grenade pin. Pete slams his fist into the guy's face, and when the grenade goes off, he barely escapes. He sprints over to the target Angie and tackles him to the ground with everything he has got. He forces the same poison down Angie's throat, and soon he is foaming at the mouth. Angie collapses, convulsing on the ground until he finally stops moving. Revenge is done. After all this, they both realize how much they mean to each other, and Pete suddenly gets it. He has been wasting his life for years, and now he wants Moira back. He wants to step up and take responsibility so his life actually means something. Then William shows up. Turns out William knew Pete wasn't the traitor all along. He actually orchestrated the whole thing. He made Pete prove himself because William's been grooming him as his successor. Taking out Angie earns the crew's respect and gets rid of a major threat at the same time. Why wouldn't he take that win? In the end, Pete and Moira get back together.